And I think we'll move on to Dan's, and since we have the slides, I'll be moving. I think we should probably move over that way so that
I can take a seat in the audience.
Yeah.
If you'd like.
All of a sudden, I felt so alone.
Oh, well, if you want me to sit
No,
there,
it's fine. It's fine.
I want to be able to see what
Yeah.
you're doing.
Me too, actually. Okay, I get it.
Power and then advance.
Okay.
Oh, I think you have to hit the
This.
middle two.
Oh, the middle two. Okay.
Is the power. There you
Okay.
go.
Oh, well, even better. Thank you. Before I jump into this, I would like to say that this is an ongoing study, so don't expect any complete pat answers, or maybe even any complete pat questions, and that also this is 8 pages boiled down from about 45. So I'm worried that it will appear skimpy, but I would be more than happy to answer any questions anybody has about it afterward. And as kind of a segue from what Rick was talking about in terms of comics being more than just mindless entertainment, this is more or less an effort to get at some of the ideology that's presented in comic books using what's essentially a formalist approach. And I'm going to start by taking my lead from Ron Goulart and pointing out that some are born great and some achieve greatness and others have greatness thrust upon them, and that's exactly how it goes down with superheroes also. Superman was born great, and this is his one-page origin story from Action Comics #1, 1938. And as you can see, the distant planet is not named yet, which is something that we think of as being central to the Superman myth. We all know that he comes from the planet Krypton, but in the original, some unnamed planet gets destroyed and a baby is sent to Earth, where he's found by a similarly unnamed passing motorist, taken to the orphanage, where the attendants, unaware of the child's physical structure, was millions of years advanced of their own, were astounded at his feats of strength. And he grows up and eventually becomes, after deciding he must turn his titanic strength into channels that would benefit mankind, he becomes Superman. And then the last 2 panels are a pseudoscientific explanation of his amazing properties, which will turn up again some years later when Stan Lee writes about Spider-Man having the proportionate strength and speed of a spider. Now, it's worth noting that the original account here makes no reference to Ma and Pa Kent. There are no indications that Superman wasn't raised in the orphanage. A year later, a more detailed, let's see if I can get this to work. Yes, a more detailed origin in Superman 1 provides for Superman's moral instruction by introducing Ma and Pa Kent, but also maintains his status as an orphan by killing them off later on. See, there they are. They're dead. At the bottom of page 2. And then Clark decides to turn his titanic strength. Hey, that's the same text. What do you know? And he becomes Superman. Okay. Batman's a different story. Batman achieves greatness. He was introduced in Detective Comics 27 in 1939, but his origin doesn't appear until issue number 33, 6 months later. And so we have the legend of the Batman, who he is and how he came to be. It's a pretty simple story. Bruce Wayne witnesses the killing of his parents at the hands of a mugger, and goes on to swear that he will spend the rest of his life waging war on all criminals. He works hard at this, becomes a master scientist, trains his body to physical perfection, serendipity provides the inspiration for his costume when a bat flies in his window, and lo and behold, the Batman. Captain Marvel had greatness thrust upon him. In his origin from Whiz Comics 2, 1940, newsboy Billy Batson, another orphan, meets a strange man and is conducted on a mysterious journey underground. These days you wouldn't find anybody following strange men into subway stations, I don't think, but these were simpler times. Billy meets the old wizard Shazam, who's sitting here under this great stone block and has all this mystic stuff happening around him, and is transformed via the magic word, another page, into Captain Marvel, and is charged with defending the poor and helpless, righting wrongs, and crushing evil everywhere. See, there he is, accepting that responsibility. Okay, having gone over this groundwork, we can now begin to make some comparisons. Although the specifics and arguably the tone of these origin stories are different, there are some structural similarities. Using methodology suggested by the work of the Russian folklorist Vladimir Prop, I've attempted to identify the common elements of these stories and fix them in some kind of relationship to each other. And to this end, I humbly offer the following 4 points as a sort of mini morphology of superhero origins. Okay. First of all, the protagonist is to some degree outside of our society. In these 3 cases, they're all orphans. But certainly there are other instances. For instance, the character can be a nerd, as in the case of Captain America and Spider-Man. I think actually that's what's next. We have a before and after Captain America. Here's the before Captain America on the lower left panel. And then after he gets his super soldier serum, what a gnarly bohunk he becomes, huh? So, and this is common. So you have this outsider who's an orphan or a nerd like Captain America or Spider-Man, a representative of some other society like Wonder Woman or the Submariner, or even a criminal like Plastic Man, or someone who's not even human at all like the original Human Torch, who is an android. Secondly, the protagonist moves through some sort of event, often a figurative or literal journey, which transforms him or her, and this amounts to a sort of initiation. Thirdly, said initiation is usually precipitated by forces beyond the control of the protagonist, such as the explosion of Krypton, to give up what one takes to be one's self-interest. This is certainly the case with Spider-Man, and as Campbell indicates is inevitable, the consequences are tragic. The story from Amazing Fantasy 15, 1962, the year I was born, goes like this. At a science exposition, nerdy Peter Parker is bitten by a radioactive spider, and this somehow imparts to him the proportional strength and speed of the spider and the ability to crawl upon walls, as we see when he's jumping up here. The next page has him scaling the whole building. But what does Peter decide to do with this power? Does he decide on the spot that he's going to fight crime? No! Peter decides to devise the identity of Spider-Man so he can go into showbiz and make lots of money. Okay, and here we see him doing just that. Spidey on TV, raking in the bucks. One evening, though, after a performance, Spider-Man refuses to stop a fleeing burglar because he doesn't want to get involved. Here he is, using the yuppie credo of, I'm just looking out for number one. That means me. Who cares? Somebody got robbed. Well, later, of course, the same burglar kills Peter's beloved Uncle Ben. And although Spider-Man ultimately catches the burglar, he's distraught at the realization that he himself is to blame for his uncle's death. By the end of the story, Spider-Man has learned his lesson that with great power must also come great responsibility. This really is the central message of superhero origin stories. What makes heroes heroic isn't just their fantastic abilities, but their willingness to put those abilities in the service of the greater good. The hero's subsequent adventures, while entertaining, serve mainly to reaffirm the principle that it is the duty of the individual to act in the best interests of society. Campbell writes, quote, if you realize what the problem is, losing yourself to some higher end or to another, you realize that this itself is the ultimate trial. When we quit thinking primarily about ourselves and our own self-preservation, we undergo a truly heroic transformation of consciousness. End quote. These stories provide a model of how individuals are supposed to act in relation to the greater society. You're not supposed to be on the outside. You're supposed to come into it and use your abilities for the greater good. Perhaps this is one reason why these stories continue to be told as a model. Or perhaps, as readers, we just want to believe that somewhere, somebody more capable than we are is acting on our behalf. Now, the Punisher was originally conceived in the 70s as an adversary for Spider-Man, and most likely he was inspired by the Dirty Harry and Death Wish films. The Punisher's kind of an inverse Batman. His wife and family are murdered by organized crime, and Frank Castle, who was an ex-Marine, decides to become the Punisher and vows to avenge their deaths by warring on all organized crime. As we can see, he usually does this with heavy ordnance and a really high body count. The star of his own comic since 1987, and the star of this one, Punisher War Journal, or War Zone, whatever it's called, since 1988, the Punisher remains one of Marvel's most popular characters. Now, it can be argued that the Punisher is a noir comic and shouldn't really be considered a superhero comic. But it's a moot point, because there certainly are plenty of superheroes around who are explicitly violent. Superman and presently Batman have each been at least temporarily supplanted by other characters wearing their costumes or variations thereof. These ersatz heroes are routinely belligerent and, if not explicitly sadistic, at least without compunction in their use of lethal force. And the other interesting thing about them is that they stick around, or some of them stick around anyway, after the conflict is resolved on who's going to be Captain America, the traditional Cap, or the renegade crypto-fascist violent Cap. What tends to happen is the original Cap will reassume the mantle, but the other character will continue to exist within the storyline in some other costume. So there's buying it. Neil Gaiman's story of a serial killers convention in The Sandman is really a study in the banality of evil. If we can look at some of the text here, the Sandman addresses a nightmare creature of his who's the prototypical serial killer, and says, all you've done is make something else for people to be scared of. You've told them that there are bad people out there, and they've known that all along. And so he reduces this guy to his nascent state, I suppose, and then turns to the room full of serial killers and says, until now you've all sustained fantasies in which you are the maltreated heroes of your own stories. No more. For all of you this dream is over. I have taken it away. For this is my judgment, that you shall know at all times and forever exactly what you are, and you shall know just how little that means. So they all leave, tails between their legs. Another example is Alan Moore's portrayal of the psychotic vigilante Rorschach in The Watchmen, which is extremely violent, but so disturbing as to hardly constitute recommended behavior. The account of Rorschach's mental and moral deterioration ends with that old chestnut, battle not with monsters lest you become a monster, and if you gaze into the abyss gazes also into you, which is, of course, Nietzsche. Here he is roughing up this guy who's actually committed an unspeakable crime, which I won't go into. And he handcuffs him, gives him a hacksaw, pours kerosene all around, lights a match, and says that he might be able to get out if he's willing to chop off his hand. Rorschach stood in the street, watched it burning, and says, of course, nobody got out, including himself. Unfortunately, such thoughtful treatments of violence in contemporary comics are few and far between. For the most part, the moral conflicts in comics today are resolved not on the basis of who is just, but on the basis of who is tougher, meaner, and stronger. And here we are, back with the Punisher, too mean to die. If that doesn't sum it up, I don't know what does. In other words, might makes right. Whether we like it or not, the four-color mirror reflects our society, and looking into it, I'm afraid I have to report that we're looking kind of ugly these days. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Dan? Comments? Anything?
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to comment, well, sort of a question comment, how Alan Moore, also in his treatment with the Miracle Man series, he sort of takes this comic book responsibility idea to an extreme. That's what he does in Watchmen also.
Yeah.
They have to save the world, and takes the costume vigilante to an extreme. And Miracle Man is the superhero
Yeah.
to an extreme.
And of course, there's in Moore's writing, there tends to be a question of the abuse of power. You know, yes, okay, you have great power and great responsibility, but does that mean that you should go ahead and abrogate the personal choices of other people? You know, which I think is a good question. Incidentally, I didn't show it because we didn't have lights, and I didn't shoot a slide, but this is the new Batman. Not quite the old user-friendly Batman, just a kind of implacable being with no face and claws and some kind of machinery stuff going on. Barely human. I think they should call it Bat Thing. So,
Okay. Thanks.
thanks.
I need the reference on Captain America 1954. I'll get that from you later.
Okay.
But I need that. I'm doing a paper.
Okay, that's actually...
I'll get it from. I'll talk to
Okay,
you
we'll
later,
talk,
right?
we'll
Yeah,
talk.
I know.